Hi everyone, it's Shar. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. I am excited because it is the day before New Year's Eve, which means we are in our final less than 48 hours of 2022, and I am finally ready to film my best books of 2022. If you're new here and you've never seen this kind of video, these aren't all books that were published in 2022. These are just the best books that I read in 2022. But for those of you who are interested in reading stats, just like I am, I will have that at the end of the video. I'm also going to apologize because it is the holiday season, which means my apartment is full of children. My nieces and nephews, they are in the rooms playing games, but of course you will hear them in the background. I apologize. I'll try to cut that out as much as I can. But without further ado, let me tell you about the top 10 books that I read in 2022. Now, this list was somewhat difficult to put together. Not because I didn't have a lot of favorites, because I did, but more so because even though I had so many 5-star reads that I loved, I couldn't necessarily consider them a favorite of the year. So I struggled to put this list together, but in the end, I have 10 books across a variety of genres that I absolutely adored this year. We're gonna count down backwards. My number 10 favorite book of the year is The Diviners by Libba Bray. I read this book in June during whatever-a-thon, and it completely took me by surprise by how much I loved it. The Diviners follows Evie O'Neill, who has psychic abilities. Whenever she touches an object, she can sometimes pull the history of that object or the person who owned the object. She is partying it up in Ohio. One day she pisses off the wrong person, and her parents are like, "You're going to New York because you have a drinking and a partying problem, and let's go party and drink some more, because why would you send your daughter to New York City to party?" Lo and behold, Evie gets there. She goes to live with her uncle, who owns this museum of curiosities, and there is a string of murders going on in the city, and Evie gets involved in trying to solve that. There are other diviners, people who have powers, that get involved. But the first book follows Evie, her discovering her powers, her meeting these other diviners, although she does not yet know that they have magical powers, and solving a mystery that has a supernatural element. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 stars, as I did almost all of the books on this list, and it was just such a good time. Something I really love that I think Libba Bray does really well is telling the story of the 1920s in New York and really painting that picture of how horrifying it was. She does not shy away from the history of the time period, and I really appreciate that. Plus, it is a horror with a supernatural element. I believe it's YA, but it is very, very well done. The 9th book on this list is another horror. We have If You See Her by Anya Ahlborn. Now, I read this during, I'll also say Camp Weekend Ween. It was called Monster Ween this year. I read this during Monster Ween, and I am completely surprised that it has made the top 10 books of the year. If You See Her is a horror story about 3 friends who go to visit this kind of abandoned, supposedly haunted house in their very small town in Detroit. I want to say they're all trying to escape. They go to visit, and one of their friends takes his own life. Then we are about 20 to 30 years in the future, where the other friend comes to our main character and says, "Hey, I need you to come with me to this house. I need closure. We need to talk about what happened." They do that, and the story picks up from there. This is a classic possession story, and the reason why I really enjoyed it, which I spoke about in depth in my Monster Ween reading vlog, is how unsettling this book was and how well it did the possession. Because for me, what was most scary about it was how our main character slowly started to lose his grip on reality, his control over his thoughts, what he was hyperfixating on, and it was just absolutely terrifying. Reading Possession from that point of view was something that I found incredibly unsettling, and I thought this book was very well done, even if the ending is unsatisfying. Number 8, we have a fantasy romance that, who was I kidding? I was thinking about not putting on this list, and then I was like, it has to go on this list. This is Fire in His Blood by Ruby Dixon. You'll recognize that name if you read Ice Planet Barbarians. So many people love Ice Planet Barbarians, and I do too, but I will tell you, the Fire Blood Dragon series, it's chef's kiss. It's very well done. If you want fantasy and you want dragons, who can shapeshift and mate, and fated mates is your thing, you're gonna love this series. So the first book is Fire in His Blood. And in this book, we're following a woman, I think her name is Claudia or something. Like, the entire earth has gone to shit because it's been raised by these dragons. And when the dragons come through the veil into the human world, they lose their grip on reality. They are just rage-filled machines with no sense of what is going on. They're very confused. The humans don't know that though. They just think that the dragons are raging and burning down the village. It is a very dire circumstance. Claudia pisses off the mayor and ends up being sacrificed to the dragon. But lo and behold, Mr. Dragon gets one sniff of her and says, mate. Now, dragons actually cannot speak, they cannot communicate, they can only telepathically communicate with their fated mates once their mates have taken in their venom and they have officially mated. It is a very fun story. It's the first time I've read a dragon shifter romance and I had a really great time with it. It's something that you get sucked into right away and the world is just so fascinating. Plus, I do love fated mates and this was a fun fated mate pair to follow. Coming in at number 7, we have Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Now, I've read the previous 2 books in the Brown Sisters trilogy already. I went backwards and my final book to read was Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I wasn't expecting a lot because I love Act Your Age Eve Brown so much, but Miss Chloe Brown, she surprised me. I love her and Red's relationship. So Get a Life, Chloe Brown follows our main character, Chloe. And Chloe has a chronic illness and she feels like she has not been able to do everything that she's wanted to in her life. One, because of the symptoms of her chronic illness and how that impacts her in her day-to-day living, but because of her own fear and anxiety. So she decides to make a list of things that she wants to accomplish. One of the first is to move out of her parents' home. She does that and she moves into this building where the superintendent is Red. And Red is our love interest. These two work together and Red helps Chloe cross items off her list while they slowly fall in love. I just love Red and Chloe's relationship. I think that it was so sweet. I appreciated seeing Chloe's perspective on her life and the things that she found meaningful and wanted to finish. It's set in London, I think. I think it's London, or it's a major city in the UK. And it was just such a fun atmosphere and setting to follow. I had a great time with this book, and that's why it is number 7 on this list. Coming in at number 6, we have Wash Day Diaries. I picked Wash Day Diaries up from my library on a whim. I thought the cover was beautiful. I love the art style and it features 4 women of color. So I was like, you know what? Let's get into it. I picked it up and I gave it 5 stars. Wash Day Diaries is about a group of 4 friends living in New York City. And each one of the sections in the book follows one character, their story, and their wash day. It centers around them washing their hair, or rather, that's the thread that's tying it all together. They are all best friends. It is about friendship. It's about how they connect with each other, their own individual lives, and what's going on around them. It's a very slice of life graphic novel, and I had such a good time with it. The friendship was fantastic. The themes and conversations that happened and how they were woven into the stories was really great, and I will just remember these women for a long time. If you haven't already read Wash Day Diaries, then I highly encourage you to do so. Number 5 on my top 10 books of 2022 is Redemptor. Redemptor is the sequel to Ray Bearer, and Ray Bearer is an African fantasy following this young girl who is the child of a magical creature. She has magical abilities. In this world, the king takes a few children to join like this council, and this council has magical powers, all supporting the Ray Bearer, the king. The mother tells daughter, hey, you're gonna go and do this, and I want you to kill the prince. So this follows the story of Tarasi. I'm mispronouncing that, so I apologize. But she goes into the tower. She's making all of these friends, but she is bound by her mother's curse to kill the prince once he loves her. So this follows that story. And in the next, we have the sequel, Redemptor. I can't tell you what Redemptor is about, but I will tell you it's following the same cast of characters. And in my opinion, I enjoyed this so much more than Ray Bearer. And it is one of my favorite books of the year. I think think about it to this day. The couples in here are so sweet. The friendship, the found family, the mythology, the lore, the magic system, the political, it just fantasy masterpiece. I freaking adored it. Sneaking its way onto this list is The Fastest Way to Fall by Denise Williams. I read this recently, so I'm really glad that I waited to make this list. The Fastest Way to Fall is a book that I just picked up at the bookstore without ever hearing someone talk about it.
Oh my God, what is that? Oh my God. What is that?
That really shiny light that you're seeing on my face is the sun glinting off of my coffee table. Let me just change the angle really quick. Sorry about that. The sun's never done that, but I'm gonna have to be careful of it. Otherwise you're gonna get that. And that's not a look. The Fastest Way to Fall is a book that I had heard nothing about, but I picked it up at the bookstore. You would have seen it in my most surprising books of the year list. So The Fastest Way to Fall follows this girl named Britta, and Britta is a magazine writer for this magazine that does health and fitness. Britta is also a plus size woman, and there's a new app called the Fit Me app. And Britta says, hey, I want to do this article of me trying this fitness app, but without trying to lose weight, for the goal just to be my own health and well-being, with absolutely no focus on weight loss or what my body looks like, just what I feel like. Her boss gives the go ahead, so Britta goes ahead and joins the Fit Me app. And Fit Me's whole mission and purpose is about health and fitness and wellness in a way that fits for you, with absolutely no emphasis on weight loss or what your body looks like. So Britta joins, and she gets matched with a personal trainer named Wes. Wes is not only the personal trainer, but what Britta does not know is that he's also the CEO of the company. Neither knows who the other person are in their own relationship dynamics. They are just trainer and trainee, I guess. So I loved this book. I just love the dynamics between Britta and Wes, but most importantly, I love the relationship between Britta and her own body and health and wellness and the conversations that happened around that. It was a super cute story that took me by surprise. I just think that it was very well written. It was a fun time. I appreciate the representation in the book. I like the perspective that you can be a bigger person and also be into health and fitness, and that fitness does not have to be about weight loss, and perhaps should not be about weight loss. So that's all I have to say about it. It was great. Take my word for it. It's number 4 on this list. Number 3 will be a surprise to no one. We have another fantasy. This is Malice by Heather Walter. So Malice is a Sleeping Beauty retelling. So it's Sleeping Beauty, but instead of the prince, the princess falls in love with the evil sorceress. Now this story, I would say, is more of an in-depth character analysis of Alice, who is our main character, and how she goes from being ostracized in her town to becoming the villain that we know her as, Maleficent. The book is sapphic. There is magic. The magic system is very well done. It is a fascinating world. The characters are beautifully developed, but I would say the central focus of the story is not necessarily the relationship between Alice and Aurora. It is a story about Alice coming into her own powers and taking revenge. And I love a revenge story. I love a hero to villain plotline. So of course this really worked for me. If you like a character driven story, and if you also like exploring the hero to villain arc, and you're interested in that component, then I would definitely recommend that you pick it up. And it is sapphic, as I mentioned. Alice and Aurora have a very interesting relationship, but I do want to emphasize that they are not necessarily central to the story. Alice and this world is central to the story. These next 2 could be interchangeable, and I've gone back and forth so many times, including right now in this video, because I'm switching their order. Number 2 on this list is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. And no one is more surprised than me to have an Emily Henry book on this list, because if you saw the books I DNF'd video, you will know how deeply I hated Book Lovers and how much I didn't like Beach Read. People We Meet on Vacation is friends to lovers supremacy. So in People We Meet on Vacation, we are following Poppy and Alex. Poppy and Alex are best friends. They knew each other in college, and every year in college and after college, they would go on a vacation together. Up until the point where something happens, we don't know what, but it's been a couple of years, they have stopped speaking. Poppy is going through a bit of a crisis. She thinks about the last time that she was happy, and it was with her friend Alex. So she reaches out to him and says, hey, I really miss you. Let's go on one more vacation. And he agrees. And this story follows them going on that vacation, but we also get flashbacks to the past for how they developed develop their friendship, it's mutual pining. So where those feelings came from and why they never pursued it. I freaking loved it, and what I will tell you is this book does have the miscommunication trope, but it is one of the only books where I thought that trope was necessary to the story. And if you can convince me that the miscommunication trope was necessary, you've done a beautiful job. But Poppy and Alex just have a fantastic relationship, and this book made me realize that I do really like Friends to Lovers when it is done well. It is an exceptional book, and I'm happy to put it at the number 2 spot for my top 10 books of 2022. And topping this list, it's a sci-fi book. That's right. It's Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is the very first book that I read in 2022. I listened to it on audio. The audiobook is exceptional. And we are here on the second to last day of 2022. And if you can't tell by my grin, I still think about this book and how much I love this book. Now, Project Hail Mary follows our main character, Ryland, although he does not know that. He is in space and he wakes up and finds that all of his crewmates are dead. All he knows is that he has a mission. He does not remember what that mission is. He is injured and he is like, yo, I got something important to do, but how the fuck did I end up in space and who am I? So we pick up from there and we follow Ryland's story of how he got into space, what his mission is, what was going down on Earth. And that's all I'm gonna tell you, because if I tell you more, which I want to, I would spoil the entire book for you. It is a fantastic ride. If, like me, you feel like sci-fi can be intimidating, know that it is very accessible sci-fi. Sometimes sci-fi can be bogged down by a lot of jargon that I just don't understand. But with this, Andy Weir did a fantastic job of making it accessible, and he could have straight up been talking out of his ass and making up facts, but he did it in a way that made me believe him. I was like, yeah, that logics to me. That makes sense to me. It is a very accessible sci-fi. It is a fantastic audiobook. It is beautifully narrated. The story is so fantastic and so layered, and I love the characters in it. The mission, what happens. The ending wasn't necessarily to my taste, meaning the epilogue, but it was still such a good time. So it was my number 1 book of the year. Those are the top 10 books of the 139 books that I read this year. I will be reading like 2 more in the next couple of days, but those are going to be smut books because it's smut-a-thon. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you are not interested in reading statistics, you can click off right now. I hope that you found some recommendations for books that you want to check out in the new year. And for those of you who are interested in reading stats, let's sit down and let's talk about it. For those of you interested in stats and seeing my knockdown bookshelf, my God, let's get into that. But before that, I just want to say thank you so much for 200 subscribers. I hit that yesterday, and I just want to say a massive thank you to anyone who watches my videos, who subscribes, who takes the time to comment on them. I just appreciate it, and your support means the world. Let's talk about some 2022 reading stats. In 2022, I read 139 books. I will warn you now that some of these stats will be wonky just because I pulled some of my stats from Storygraph, and they didn't translate all of my Goodreads 2022 books, and also because I am sick. And I was high as hell off of NyQuil last night when I was finishing up my December stats. They're mostly accurate for the most part, but just want to warn you that if you notice like slight skewing, it's because of that. So let's start with the number of pages that I read. I read 139 books this year and about 37,737 pages. The shortest book that I read was Invaded by the Eyewatch. We don't need to talk about that. It was 17 pages. And the longest book that I read this year was European Travel for the Monstrous Gentleman, coming in at a whopping 720 pages. I gave that book like 2.5 stars. Yikes, besties. My average book length in 2022 was 271 pages. Most of my books fell in that length, but if we want to go deeper into the statistics of that, about 53% of the books that I read were under 300 pages. 41% were in the 300 to 500 range, and about 6% were 500 pages or longer. It's primarily because I read romance, and most of the books tend to fall in that 250 to 350 range. I have a few top genres for the year. My number 1 genre, which is a surprise to no one, is romance. The majority of books that I read this year was romance books. Then it's followed by fantasy books. Then LGBTQIA books, which is a variety of books, anything from contemporary books to fantasy, anything like that I read, and that's just Storygraph filling that in. Contemporary was my next highest, then erotica, mystery, thriller, horror, and then it falls below that. That is a surprise to no one. Those tend to be the genres that I am most interested in, so of course I read from those genres this year. In terms of my most read authors, the number one author I read from this year is Jessica Cain at 8 books. If you see my videos, you know that Jessica Cain and I have a very complicated relationship. I think that she can write smut well, but I also think that there are some hella problematic themes in her books, and I hate that her heroines are often 18 years old, dating men who are much older than them. The problem necessarily isn't the age gap, it's that these men very much like how young and naive these girls are, and some of these men fantasize about them as they were minors. Ew. My next highest read author this year was Ruby Dixon. That's because I was reading the Fire Blood Dragon series, followed by Darcy Coates. I read 5 Darcy Coates books. She's one of my favorite horror authors, so that's a surprise to no one. Laura Thalasta, I read 4 books. I completed her entire Four Horsemen's series, so that's why she's up here. And then Ursa Dack, same thing. I was reading her Alien Sandman series, so that's also why she's up here. The other authors, it's the exact same situation. I was reading books in a series, which is why the author has showed up multiple times. Now let's get into the nitty gritty of the stats, which I just love doing. It's gonna be so much fun to reflect on this and then to compare it in future years. As I mentioned, I read 139 books in 2022. Here's a little chart for you of my star ratings. Excuse my niece throwing a tantrum. I didn't rate one book, and that's because it was something about healing. It's like a self-help nonfiction, which I don't rate. I gave 3 books 1 star this year. I gave 17 books 2 stars this year. 35 books, I gave 3 stars. I gave 42 books 4 stars, and I gave 41 books 5 stars. You can see the breakdown here with the majority of my books were 3-star and above, so a fantastic reading year. For the average rating for the year, that breaks down to 3.7. If we break down these stats by month, let me show you what that looks like. Let's start with the number of books that I read per month. January, I read the most number of books at 21 books. In February, I read 5 books. In March, I only read 2 books. In April, I read 19 books. In May, I read 7 books. In June, I read 19 books. In July, I read 14 books. In August, I read 8 books. In September, I read 8 books. In October, I read 16 books. In November, I read 14 books. And in December, I read 5 books. Looking at this graph alone, you can see that this graph was very up and down. I'm very much a mood reader. There were months where I was not consistent, but to me that says that reading about 139 books is just my comfortable range, because there were some months where I barely read at all, and at no point in the year did I push myself to read more books, nor would I ever do that. If we break down those stats even further, which was my best reading month? So in January, I gave 6 books 5 stars, I gave 6 books 4 stars, I gave 4 books 3 stars, and I gave 2 books 2 stars, and I gave 2 books 1 star. So in January, my average rating was 3.42. You can see that I gave 6 books 4 stars and 6 books 5 stars, so pretty good overall. In February, my average rating was 3.8, but that is skewed because I only read about 5 books in that month, and the majority of the books fell within that 4 and 3 star range. In March, I only read 2 books. The average rating was 3 stars, so you can see March was not really a great reading month. It was okay. I had 1 4-star book and I had 1 2-star book. In April, my average rating was 3.89. I gave the most books 4 stars. In May, my average rating was 4.28, and I gave the majority of books in May 3 and 2 stars. It was pretty even across the board, but the most number of 3 and 2 stars was May. My average rating in June was 3.84. I had a fantastic reading month in June. I gave out 7 5 stars. Moving on to the second half of the year, July, my average rating was 3.28. The majority of books were 4-star reads and 2-star reads. So again, we have quite the range here. In August, my average rating was 4.12. Again, that number is skewed because I read a smaller number of books. I read 3 5 stars, 3 4 stars, and 2 3 stars. So pretty even across the board, no 2 stars and no 1 stars. In September, I gave the majority of books 3 and 4 stars for an average rating of 3.62. In October, my average rating was 3.81. I had a great reading month in October where I gave out 5 4 stars, but 8 3 stars. So the majority of the books were just okay for me. Coming to the final 2 months of the year, November, as I suspected, was one of my better reading months. My average rating in November was 4.21. So definitely one of my highest rated. It's tied technically with May, but again, May I read less books, so that's why that number is skewed. But in November, I read plenty of books, and in November, I gave out 7 5-star reads. The last time that had happened was in June. November tied with June for that, but it was a very high reading month with an average rating of 4.21. And then in December, I definitely slowed down with my reading, largely because I was traveling for half of December. So in December, my average rating was 3.33, where I gave out mostly 5 and 4 stars, and a couple of 2-star reads. Let's go in and talk about the books themselves. So let's talk about formatting of books. Of the 139 books that I read this year, I read 22 audiobooks, which breaks down to about 15% of my reading. I read 74 ebooks, which is about 53% of my reading. And I read 42 books physically for about 30% of my reading. You can see the majority of my reading I read via ebook. Where I acquired these books from, 35 of the books that I read I owned, which is great. That's about 25% of my reading happened from my own physical library. That's something that I always work towards. 32 books I read from my library. That's about 23% of my reading. Again, that's fantastic because I love utilizing my local library. I read 54 books on Kindle Unlimited. That breaks down to about 38% of my reading. So you can see I am a KU girly. I read a lot from Kindle Unlimited. 15 of the books I read on Scribd. That's about 10% of my reading, and 3% of the books that I read on Audible, which means that I also own those books. So also reading from my own library. And in terms of our final reading stat, which is publication year. So let's talk about publication year for the books that I read. 4 of the books that I read were published before 2012. I read 3 books that were published in 2012. I read 1 book that was published in 2014, 5 that were published in 2015, 5 that were published in 2016, 11 that were published in 2017, 14 that were published in 2018, 18 that were published in 2019. This becomes the chunk of this chart here. 18 books that were published in 2020, 25 books that were published in 2021, and 35 books that were published in 2022. So you can see that about 25% of the books that I read this year were books that were published in 2022. And that's it. And those are all of the reading stats for my 2022 reading year. Again, thank you so much for being here with me. It was really fun to put together these stats, but also get that good analysis of what I'm reading, where I'm pulling from, and that will help me set my goals for the upcoming year. I wish you a very happy New Year's. Let's celebrate the end of 2022, and I will see you next week for my very first video of 2023. As always, thank you so much for being here. Subscribe if you would like to. I would deeply appreciate the support, and I will see you next time. Bye!